I didn't know what the paper said. All I knew was that my hands were shaking and my knees wouldn't stop trembling. The agent looked at me, then down at the document, and said it, calmly, like he was reading out the weather. That signature meant I was leaving the country, voluntarily, legally, as if I had asked for it, as if I had wanted this. I remember blinking hard, thinking I had misunderstood him. I asked him again, my voice already broken. He didn't flinch, just pointed to the paragraph with my name and said, "You signed this 2 weeks ago, ma'am." That's when the floor collapsed beneath me. My legs gave out. I sat right there on the cold tile of the hotel where I worked, surrounded by cleaning carts and bleach bottles, the smell of ammonia burning my nose. That was the exact moment I died inside. You never expect betrayal to come with paperwork. You imagine screaming, maybe a fight. You never imagine it shows up as a form, neat and official, with your own signature used against you. Like a knife in the chest. I had trusted him. I had signed it without reading because he told me to, because he said it was about a job offer, a chance for me to finally get legal status. He told me it was a gift. He said, "This is our shot," and I smiled, like a fool. I remember I even kissed his cheek afterward. I said, "Thank you." I thanked him for handing me over. That document was the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. 20 years in this country, 20 years working, cleaning rooms, scrubbing floors, being invisible, but surviving. I sent money to my family every month. I never missed a birthday. I didn't have a car, didn't go on vacations, didn't buy fancy clothes. All I wanted was to stay, to work, to build a home, to be with the man I thought loved me. He knew that. He knew my dreams, and he used every single one of them to destroy me. The agents were kind, too kind. That made it worse. One of them even offered me water. I looked at him and wanted to scream. Don't be gentle with me. Be cruel. Make it match what I'm feeling. Because inside, I was burning alive. I could still hear my husband's voice from 2 weeks ago. "Just sign it, baby. It's nothing." I had asked him, "Do I need to read it?" He laughed. "You trust me, don't you?" And I did. God help me, I did. The cruelest part is not the paper itself, it's what it means. That he planned this. That he knew exactly what he was doing. That while I was folding his shirts and making his lunch and praying for our future, he was looking for a way to erase me. Like I was a mistake he needed to fix. Like I was an old receipt he wanted to throw away. No one deserves that. No woman deserves to be used like a pawn and then discarded like trash. I gave him my best years. My youth, my health, my hope, and all I got in return was a one-way ticket out of the only place I had ever tried to call home. That morning, I had woken up early. I made coffee, like always. I ironed his uniform. I even wrote him a small note, folded and tucked in his lunch bag. "I love you, mi vida." He never read it. He probably threw it away, because by then, he had already moved on. He was already living with another woman, a woman with papers, a woman who could give him what I couldn't. Not love, status. He used me to survive, and when he didn't need me anymore, he buried me with a signature, my own. You might be listening to this and thinking, how could she be so naive? And I don't blame you. I've asked myself the same thing every day since. But when you come to this country with nothing, you cling to anything that looks like love, even if it hurts, even if it bruises, even if it lies. That's the thing about people like me. We love too hard. We work too hard. We hope too much. And when that hope is crushed, it's not just pain. It's erasure. It's silence. It's the feeling that your existence never really mattered. I remember sitting in that ICE van, handcuffed, trying to remember the last time I looked at him and felt safe. I couldn't. All I saw was his smile the night I signed that paper. A smile I thought was pride. Now I know it was relief. He had won. But I want you to hear this part. If you're watching this, and you've ever been lied to, used, discarded, made to feel small, I see you. Your pain is real. Your story matters. Comment below and tell me. My story deserves to be heard, because we need to break this silence together. And if this story touched something in your heart, subscribe to this channel. Not just for me. For every woman who thought love was enough. For every woman who signed something thinking it was a promise, only to realize it was her undoing. Here, your voice will never be ignored again. My name is María del Carmen López. I am 46 years old. I live in Texas now, but my story began far from here, in a tiny village buried deep in the hills of Puebla, Mexico. A place where time moves slower, and where dreams are usually packed away. and mailed overseas along with money orders. I was raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a car accident when I was just 6. She was a woman of few words and strong hands. Her skin was like parchment, and her voice was rough from years of smoke and sorrow. She used to say, "Mija, women like us are born to carry more than we're given." Growing up, I learned how to wash clothes in the river, how to knead dough with the rhythm of prayer, and how to survive without asking for much. That was life. No birthday parties, no toys, just responsibilities. At 12, I was already taking care of younger cousins. At 14, I was cleaning the homes of people who never once looked me in the eye, but I never complained. I thought that was just what women were meant to do: serve, sacrifice, smile. The idea of coming to the United States was planted in me slowly. A neighbor's son had gone north and sent back pictures. Walmart parking lots, shiny kitchen appliances, streets with lines so clean they looked painted by angels. But more than that, he sent money, dollars, crisp, powerful paper that made dreams possible back home. And so the idea grew, until one day it bloomed into desperation. At 19, I borrowed money from a woman in the village who charged interest like she was selling salvation. I packed my things in a plastic bag and kissed my grandmother goodbye without letting her see me cry. I told her I'd be back in a year. That was 27 years ago. The journey across the border was a scar all its own. I crossed with a group of strangers, guided by a coyote who smelled of tequila and lies. We walked through the desert for 2 nights, hiding under bushes during the day. I remember the hunger like it was still in my bones, the fear of helicopters, the sound of snakes in the dry grass, the way every step felt like betrayal to the girl I once was. But I made it. I arrived in Laredo with blisters, dirt under my nails, and a heart that refused to stop hoping. From there, I took a bus to Dallas, where a woman from my village had promised me a job cleaning motel rooms. That was the beginning of my American life. Long days, short nights, a mattress on the floor, and a prayer whispered into the dark every single night. I prayed not for riches, but for stability, for a roof that wouldn't leak, for food that wouldn't run out, for papers that would let me live without hiding. It was in that motel, just 2 months after arriving, that I met him. The man who would change everything. He was working maintenance. His name was Enrique. He had kind eyes, a steady voice, and the kind of charm that makes you forget how tired you are. We spoke the same Spanish, laughed at the same jokes. He brought me pan dulce on my breaks. He helped me fix the broken light in my room without being asked. One night, we sat on the steps outside the motel and talked until the stars faded into morning. That was the night I let myself believe I could be loved. Weren't rich. We didn't even have a bed frame, but we had each other. We would sit on the floor, eat rice and beans from plastic bowls, and dream out loud. He said one day we'd open our own cleaning business, that we'd get married, that he'd help me get my papers. He even said we'd visit my grandmother once I was legal. I held on to those words like they were gold. I believed him with the faith of a woman who has never been given much, but who gives everything. People don't talk enough about how dangerous hope can be when it's all you have. Hope makes you ignore red flags. Hope makes you excuse bad days. Hope tells you that love is supposed to be hard. So when he started coming home late, I didn't ask questions. When he stopped bringing flowers on Fridays, I told myself it was because he was tired. When he started locking his phone, I said nothing, because hope had blinded me, and love had made me quiet. But those first years, before the silence, were beautiful in their own way. We shared a 1-bedroom apartment with another couple, both undocumented like us. We used to joke that we were living like sardines, packed in and sweating through the Texas heat with just one fan between us. But we had laughter, we had stories, we had plans, and I held on to those memories for years, long after they stopped being real. He never hit me. That's important to say, because sometimes we think if someone isn't hitting us, they must be loving us. But abuse wears many faces, and sometimes it wears the smile of the man who once brushed your hair behind your ear and said you were his forever. I spent birthdays waiting for him to come home. I spent holidays working double shifts so we could afford a second-hand couch. I worked while he looked for better opportunities. I cooked meals he barely touched. I wore dresses he never noticed. But I told myself that's what commitment looked like. That sacrifice was the price of belonging. That one day, everything would be worth it. I'd wake up at 4 a.m. every morning to catch 2 buses to the hotel. I cleaned rooms with bloodstains, with secrets, with heartbreak still lingering in the sheets. I scrubbed toilets while thinking about my future. I learned to work like I didn't have a body, like I didn't have a soul that ached for more. Because for people like us, survival comes before dignity. And yet, even with all of that, I loved him. I loved him in the way only immigrant women know how to love, deeply, quietly, entirely. I saw the best in him long after it stopped existing. I held on long after I should have let go, because I had already lost so much. I couldn't bear to lose one more thing. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own relationship, if you've ever given your all and received silence in return, I want you to know you are not alone. Drop a comment below and write, "I deserve to be seen," because you do. Every woman who builds love from scratch, who sacrifices silently, deserves to be acknowledged. And if this story feels like a piece of your own, subscribe to this channel, not for likes, not for numbers, but because sharing our stories might be the only way we survive the ones that tried to destroy us. When I think about my childhood, I don't remember toys or birthdays. I remember the sound of my grandmother's worn slippers dragging across the dirt floor, the smell of corn boiling on the stove, and the distant hum of a radio always playing old ballads that spoke of heartbreak and longing. That was my reality. Simple, harsh, unforgiving. In our tiny village in Puebla, no one had dreams. We had duties. At 6 years old, I was already expected to help cook, fetch water from the well, and keep quiet unless spoken to. There was no space for fantasy, just survival. My grandmother used to say, "The only thing a poor girl can afford to own is her silence." So I grew up swallowing words, desires, pain. I learned early that being a girl meant being invisible unless someone needed something from you. The first time I ever saw a television was in the back room of a local shop. It was old, blurry, black and white, but I remember a scene. A woman stepping off a plane, smiling, walking into a bright, wide street. That image never left me. I didn't even know what country it was, but it felt like freedom. I wasn't supposed to leave. Girls like me stay. We become wives before we turn 20. We raise children in houses without running water. We wait for husbands who drink too much and say too little. But something in me rebelled against that fate. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was foolishness. But I refused to believe that this was all I was made for. When I turned 19, I made a decision that changed everything. I told my grandmother I was leaving. She didn't cry. She just turned her face away and handed me the rosary her own mother had given her. She said, "If you go, go with God. But remember, the world does not welcome women like us with open arms. It waits to test us." I nodded. I didn't understand her fully then, but I would. Crossing the border was not something I did with pride. It was something I did with desperation. I joined a group of 12 strangers, most of them men, led by a coyote who promised us the road to the American dream for a price. That price included fear, hunger, and silence. We walked for hours in the desert, through heat that melted the air and cold nights that made my bones ache. One girl collapsed from dehydration. The coyote kicked her awake. I watched and did nothing, because I was afraid, because I knew that stopping for her could mean death for all of us. After 2.5 days, we were picked up on the side of a highway near Laredo by a man in a truck with no license plates. I sat in the back, pressed against a window covered in dust, my hands gripping my grandmother's rosary so tight the beads left bruises. That truck ride was the first time I saw America. But it wasn't bright or welcoming. It was dry, gray, and silent. But it was better than going back. When I arrived in Dallas, I was given a room in a small apartment shared by 5 other women, all undocumented. We slept on mattresses on the floor, shared one bathroom, and took turns using the hot plate to cook. My first job was cleaning motel rooms. I remember the manager told me, "You don't speak English, right? Good. Then no talking to guests." I nodded, because I needed that job, because I had come here to work, not to be liked. And it was there, among sheets that smelled of cigarette smoke and bathrooms covered in grime, that I met him. Enrique. He was working maintenance, fixing clogged sinks and broken TVs. He was tall, with dark hair and a crooked smile that made him look like he was always halfway between a joke and a secret. He called me Señorita, even when I was covered in sweat and bleach. He made me feel seen. One evening, I was struggling to carry a cart full of towels up a narrow flight of stairs. He appeared out of nowhere, took the cart from my hands, and said, "You shouldn't be lifting that alone. It's not right." No one had ever said something like that to me. Not in my village, not in my life. That moment cracked something open inside me. He started bringing me little things, a soda on a hot day, a chocolate bar, a tiny rose he found growing behind the building. Nothing expensive, just small gestures that felt like kindness in a world that offered so little of it. We started talking during our breaks. We'd sit outside near the dumpsters, where the smell wasn't too bad, and he'd tell me about his dreams, how he wanted to open a car repair shop one day, how he used to race bikes when he was younger, how he was tired of running from immigration, from bad jobs, from fear. I listened. I shared my own dreams in pieces. I told him about my grandmother, about how I wanted to one day send her enough money so she could fix the roof of our old house. I told him I wanted to feel safe. I told him I wanted papers, not for luxury, but so I could go to the doctor without being afraid. He looked at me and said, "We'll get there, together." That word, together, meant everything to me. It made all the sacrifices feel like investments, like one day they would pay off. We started dating, quietly, secretly. We couldn't risk too much attention. Two undocumented workers loving each other in a world that already wanted us gone was dangerous, but it was also the only thing that felt real. When we finally moved in together, we didn't have much. A mattress on the floor, two mismatched chairs, a pot and a pan, but I was happy. I would light candles at night and pretend it was romance, not a power outage. I would cook rice and beans and serve it with a smile. He'd come home late sometimes, but I'd stay up and wait for him. That's what love does. It waits. If you've ever started from nothing, if you've ever looked at cracked walls and called it home because someone you love is inside, I want to hear your voice. Drop a comment and say, "Love made me believe." Because love is powerful, and sometimes it's all we have. If this story touched you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, not just to support these stories, but to remind the world that behind every immigrant face is a heart full of dreams, a body full of scars, and a soul that refuses to give up. We got married at the courthouse on a Tuesday morning. No dress, no guests, no music. Just us, two witnesses, and a judge with a tired voice who read our names like we were signing up for a phone plan. But to me, it was sacred. It was my moment. I looked at Enrique and thought, this is it, the beginning of the life we had dreamed of together. I remember holding his hand as we walked out into the parking lot. It was cold that day, and he wrapped his jacket around my shoulders like he had done so many times before. I thought I was safe. We rented a small studio apartment just outside of Oak Cliff. It had stained carpets, peeling paint, and a kitchen so tiny that if one of us was cooking, the other had to wait in the hallway. But we made it home. I brought in candles. He put up a calendar with a picture of a beach in Cancun. It was tacky, but it was ours. We even had a little cactus plant on the windowsill. I named it Esperanza. I worked 6 days a week cleaning hotel rooms. Enrique picked up odd jobs, plumbing, painting, sometimes construction when someone would take him on without asking for papers. We were never rich, not even close, but we were proud. We never asked for help. We cooked at home, budgeted every dollar, and when we had a little extra, we'd buy pan dulce from the corner bakery on Sundays. That was our treat. Sitting on the couch with coffee and sweet bread, watching telenovelas, pretending we had nothing to worry about. Enrique was sweet at first. He'd leave notes for me on the bathroom mirror. Little things like, "Love you, mi reina," or "You're the reason I work so hard." He'd massage my feet after long shifts and kiss the bruises on my hands. He would say, "One day, you won't have to clean other people's messes anymore." And I believed him, because that's what love does. It makes you believe. But slowly, those gestures faded. He started coming home later, said work was getting longer, said the boss was making him stay extra. I wanted to believe him, but something in his tone had changed. He stopped asking how my day was, stopped noticing when I was tired. He used to wait for me at the bus stop when I got off the late shift. Now, he barely looked up from his phone when I walked through the door. I tried to bring the spark back. I cooked his favorite meals, pozole, enchiladas, carne guisada. I even bought a little perfume with the tips I had saved, the kind that smells like vanilla and cinnamon. He barely noticed. He said he was tired, always tired. He started locking his phone, something he never did before. I saw numbers I didn't recognize, messages that would disappear. Once, I saw a photo of him at a party I wasn't invited to. He said it was a co-worker's birthday. He said I wouldn't have liked it. I said nothing, because I was afraid of what I'd hear if I asked too much. He began pulling away physically. At first it was subtle. He'd turn his back in bed, stop holding my hand when we walked outside. Then it became obvious. Days would pass without a kiss, weeks without touch. When I asked him if something was wrong, he'd shrug and say, "You're imagining things. Don't start acting crazy." That phrase, "don't start acting crazy," became a weapon he used often. Every time I cried, every time I asked for affection, every time I tried to reach the man I once knew. But I still cooked, I still cleaned, I still folded his clothes and placed his toothbrush next to mine. Because letting go felt harder than holding on. Because I thought maybe if I just worked a little harder, loved him a little more, things would go back to how they were. I started blaming myself. Maybe I wasn't pretty enough anymore. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe he needed space. Maybe. I lost myself in excuses. The silence between us grew thick. We went from sharing dreams to sharing silence. And silence is a cruel companion. It makes every sound feel louder. The creak of the door when he left without saying goodbye. The soft buzz of his phone at midnight. The water running in the shower while I sat on the bed, wondering if he was texting her. Because by then, I knew. I didn't have proof, but I knew. His lies had become too neat, too rehearsed. And my gut, the one thing I had always trusted, screamed at me every time he said, "I love you." Those words had started to taste bitter, like they were no longer meant for me. But I kept showing up, because women like me don't quit. We endure. We hold on until we have nothing left to hold. I told myself I was staying for love, but deep down, I was staying for fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over. Fear that everything I gave would turn to nothing if I walked away. And that's what they never tell you. That sometimes staying feels safer than leaving. That love, when it turns cold, doesn't disappear. It lingers. It haunts. It fools you into thinking it's still there, hiding beneath the pain. But it's not. If you've ever stayed when your heart was breaking, if you've ever watered a relationship hoping it would bloom again, tell me your truth in the comments. Just write, "I gave it everything I had," because your story matters. And if this story has reached a corner of your soul that needed to be seen, subscribe to this channel. Let's create a place where women like us don't have to carry our pain in silence anymore. The first time I smelled her, it was on his shirt. A faint scent, something floral and sweet. The kind of perfume that lingers on fabric like a memory you didn't ask for. He had come home late again. I was folding laundry, pressing my nose into the sleeves out of habit, because that was how I used to feel close to him when the days kept us apart. But that night, the scent was not mine. It was unfamiliar. It was invasive. It wrapped around my throat like a warning. I stared at the shirt for a long time. My fingers stopped moving. My mind tried to explain it away. Maybe he hugged someone. Maybe someone bumped into him on the bus. Maybe it was just something from work. I told myself all of that, but my heart knew. Because our bodies recognize betrayal long before our minds are willing to admit it. When I asked him about it, I kept my voice light, almost playful. I said, "You smell different." He didn't flinch. He laughed. He said, "Oh, that? Some lady on the bus was wearing too much perfume. I think it rubbed off." Then he kissed me on the forehead and walked away. And I stood there, heart pounding, feeling like I had just swallowed 1,000 needles. It didn't stop there. The signs multiplied quickly, each one more obvious than the last. His phone was always face down now. The password changed. The notification stopped showing on the screen. He would take long showers the moment he got home. He started dressing better. New shirts, new shoes, cologne he never used to wear. He shaved more often, styled his hair differently. I told myself maybe he was just trying to feel better about himself. Maybe this was good. But inside, I felt like I was slowly drowning. One night, I heard him whispering in the kitchen. It was late. I had just finished cleaning the bathroom. The house was quiet, but I could hear the low murmur of his voice, the soft rhythm of Spanish, but not the kind he used with me. His tone was different, softer, warmer. I walked closer, barefoot, each step a betrayal of my own denial. I couldn't make out the words, just the sound of her name. Then laughter, his laughter, the kind I hadn't heard in months. He said he was talking to a friend, a coworker. He said I was imagining things, that I needed to stop being paranoid, that I was making problems, where there were none. So I apologized. I apologized for asking, for noticing, for caring. That's what manipulation looks like. It's not loud, it's subtle. It convinces you that you are the problem, that your instincts are flaws, that your love is suffocating. He stopped touching me altogether. His body became a stranger's. We shared a bed, but not a life. He turned away from me at night, wrapped in silence. I would lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, remembering when he used to pull me close, and whisper that he couldn't sleep unless he felt my heartbeat against his back. I started looking for evidence, something to prove what I already felt. A receipt, a message, a clue. But there was nothing. He was careful, too careful. That made it worse. It meant it wasn't just a mistake. It was intentional. It was maintained, protected. He began to disappear on weekends, said he was helping a friend renovate a house, said it was good money. I asked if I could go with him once. He said, no, that I'd just get bored, that I should rest, that he needed space. So I stayed home. I cleaned the apartment until my knuckles bled. I cooked meals he didn't eat. I sat by the window like a fool, waiting for someone who had already left me in every way except physically. I remember one Sunday, I called his name from the kitchen. He didn't answer. I walked into the living room and found him smiling at his phone. Smiling. A soft, shy kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. He didn't even notice. Me standing there. When he finally looked up, his expression changed so fast it was like a mask had slipped. He said, "What? You scared me." I said nothing. I just nodded. And in that moment, I realized that I no longer existed in his world. I was just background noise, something to be managed, not cherished. I tried to talk to him that night. I told him I felt invisible, that I missed us, that I didn't know what I had done wrong. He sighed, leaned back and said, "You're always so emotional. That's why I don't talk to you anymore." Then he walked away. And just like that, my silence became my prison. I started shrinking. In every way, I spoke less, smiled less. I stopped singing while I cleaned. I stopped wearing the little earrings he used to compliment. I became a ghost in my own home. A shadow, moving through rooms filled with memories of a love that no longer wanted to be seen. What hurt most wasn't the suspicion of another woman. It was the way he stopped being mine long before. I realized I had lost him. The way he looked past me. The way he answered with one word when I asked how his day was. The way he flinched when I touched him. The way I had to beg for basic kindness. I kept asking myself, why wasn't I enough? What did she have that I didn't? Was she prettier? Smarter? Did she make him feel younger? Freer? I tore myself apart looking for answers that would never come. Because sometimes, betrayal has nothing to do with the one betrayed. It's about the emptiness in the betrayer. And I had no control over that. But still, I stayed. Because leaving would have meant admitting that the future I had built in my mind was a lie, and I wasn't ready for that. I was clinging to the version of him that existed only in memories. I was holding on to the way he used to tuck my hair behind my ear and say, "How did I get so lucky?" If you have ever felt replaced, if you've ever questioned your worth because someone you loved stopped seeing you, speak your truth in the comments. Just write, "I am still worthy." Because you are. Even if they couldn't see it, you still shine. And if these words echo something buried deep inside your heart, consider subscribing to this channel. Not just for stories like mine, but for the comfort of knowing you are not going through this alone. Here, we don't heal in silence. We rise in truth. He came home with a folder in his hand and a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, my hands raw, from the cheap soap we always bought. He kissed my cheek, called me amour, and said he needed my signature on something. I wiped my hands on the towel and turned to him. "What is it?" I asked. He said it was just paperwork, something to help with a new job he was applying for, that it had to do with taxes and residency, and that it would benefit both of us. He said he'd already signed it, and all that was missing was my part. I looked at the paper, but it was in English. Long lines, tiny. Print, legal language that might as well have been written in another universe. I asked him what it said exactly. He shrugged, smiled again, and said, "You trust me, right?" And I did. That was my biggest mistake. I trusted him more than I trusted myself. I held the pen in my hand, hesitated. He noticed. He leaned in and said softly, "Do you think I would ever do anything to hurt you? Everything I do is for us. You'll see." So I signed, right there, on the counter next to the dirty dishes and the crumbs from dinner. I didn't read it. I didn't even ask to keep a copy. Because when you love someone, your guard is down. You believe their voice over your doubts. You choose peace over suspicion. He took the folder, kissed my forehead, and left the apartment. I stood there for a moment, not knowing that I had just signed away everything, not knowing that in the eyes of immigration, I had just voluntarily agreed to be deported. In the days that followed, nothing seemed different. He was actually more attentive, brought me flowers, took me out for tacos, held my hand in public, which he hadn't done in months. I thought maybe things were changing for the better. Maybe he was remembering who we were. Maybe he still loved me. But what I didn't know was that behind the scenes, he was already preparing his new life, a life that didn't include me. 2 weeks later, I was cleaning the hallway on the 3rd floor of the hotel when the agents showed up. They called my name. I turned around, confused, thinking maybe it was a mistake. I had no idea they were immigration officers at first. They weren't wearing uniforms. They looked like regular people. I even smiled at them. Then they showed me their badges and said I had to come with them, that I was being removed from the country under my own consent, that I had signed a voluntary departure form. I laughed, a nervous, broken laugh. I said, no, that's not possible. I would never do that. But they were calm, too calm. They said, ma'am, your signature is on the document. You agreed to this. It's already been processed. I dropped the cleaning supplies right there on the floor. My knees buckled. I couldn't breathe. I kept repeating, there's a mistake. My husband gave me those papers. He said they were for a job. They looked at each other. One of them stepped forward, more gently this time, and said, I'm sorry, but it's already in the system. The removal has been approved. We have to take you in today. I asked to call him. I dialed his number again and again. No answer, just voicemail. I texted him, where are you? Please, something is happening. They're saying you tricked me. Nothing. Silence. They gave me a moment to gather my things. I went to the break room, took my purse, and looked around at the mop bucket, the faded posters on the wall, the stack of towels I hadn't finished folding. It felt like my life was being cut off mid-sentence, like someone had pressed delete on everything I had worked for. In the van, they let me sit by the window. I watched the buildings pass, the same streets I had walked for years. I passed the bakery where Enrique and I used to buy bread, the park where we once danced during a festival, the corner where he kissed me for the first time. Each place felt like it was being ripped from me piece by piece. At the processing center, everything moved like a machine. They took my fingerprints, my photo. They gave me a number, not a name, a number. They told me to sit. I waited for hours, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what had happened. I kept thinking, maybe this is a mistake. Maybe he will show up. Maybe he will fix it. But he didn't. And the truth hit me like a truck. He had done this on purpose. He had planned it. He had used me, and then he had discarded me like a problem to be solved. Later that night, one of the women who worked at the center came to speak with me. She was Latina too. She asked me if I knew what I had signed. I shook my head. I told her what happened. Her face changed. Her voice softened. She said, you might be a victim of fraud. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this. That was when the first crack of light appeared in the darkness. When I realized maybe, just maybe, this didn't have to be the end. But the betrayal, the humiliation, the abandonment, they left scars that paper and process can't erase. If you've ever trusted someone and they used that trust against you, if you've ever been deceived in a way that took something from your very soul, leave a comment. Just write, they broke me but I'm still standing. Because you are. And your voice deserves to rise from the ashes of what they tried to silence. And if this story reflects even a piece of your own pain, subscribe to this channel. Let this be a place where truth finds its way through the cracks, where the wounded are believed, where we rebuild, word by word, breath by breath. I was seized in the hallway of the hotel, the 3rd floor where I had cleaned so many rooms. I was carrying a cart stacked with fresh towels and hearing the faint hum of the air conditioner struggling in the summer heat when voices called my name. My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought they were asking for help. I turned. 2 men stood there, formal clothes, badges glinting. They said, ma'am, we need you to come with us. My brain froze. I dropped the towels. The piles tumbled. The clack of the wheels echoed through the corridor. My mind raced 1,000 thoughts. Was this a mistake? Was I being robbed? Then one of them showed the badge of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They led me out. Right there, under the eyes of people I'd passed hundreds of times, I realized I was visible now, in the worst possible way. The scent of bleach and hotel carpet lingered in my nostrils. I could hear voices down the stairs, the murmur of curiosity. Someone looked. I felt exposed. In the van, I sat by the window. Concrete. Buildings blurred past. The street we drove felt familiar. The bakery where I'd bought the rose he found for me stood just ahead. The toy store we walked past last Christmas flashed by. I held my rosary in one hand, bruised from pressing the beads too hard earlier without realizing. I replayed the last 2 weeks in my head. The paper I signed, his smile, the quiet nights he'd spent on his phone. None of it made sense yet. At the detention center, they stripped me of my name, gave me a number. My hands were cold. The fluorescent lights were harsh. I sat in a chair made of bolted metal, the kind that isn't meant for comfort. They asked my details again and again. When, where, how long? Each question cut me further away from the life I thought I knew. A Latina woman, an agent I suppose, sat across from me. She looked at the folder, but her eyes were softer than anyone else's. She asked if I knew what I signed. I shook my head, tried to explain. I said, "My husband gave me the papers. He told me it was about a new job." Her face changed. Quietly, she said, "You might be a victim of fraud." Fraud. That word hung in the air like a curse. Someone had used me. Not because I was weak, because I trusted, because I believed. The system they used was cold, legal, official, but beneath it was betrayal. In that room, I watched other women. Some sobbed softly, others sat with steely faces. We shared a glance, no words, recognition. We were not alone in this, but alone felt more accurate, because each of us carried a secret story of trust broken. Later they offered me a cot, thin mattress. It hissed when I sat. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. The air smelled like antiseptic and regret. I thought about the times I cleaned bathroom tile with someone else's toothbrush in hand, and the times I ironed his shirt with hope that we were building something. Everything became nonsense now. A guard came and said we'd be moved. I walked in handcuffs. The click of metal echoed in my ears. I tried not to cry. Couldn't. I was past tears. My throat burned. I thought, so this is how they remove you. Without a roar, a single document, a signature, and you're gone. If you've ever felt like everything you worked for dissolved in a moment, I see you. I feel your trembling hands. I hear your swallowed words. Comment below and write I survived the silence, because your story deserves to echo. And if hearing this makes your heart tighten a little too much, subscribe to this channel so you'll know you're not the only one. You're not forgotten. They moved me to a different holding facility at dawn. I had not slept. My eyes were open all night, not because of the noise, not because of the cold, but because my mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept hearing his voice. I kept seeing his face when he told me to sign the paper. I replayed the moment like a broken movie reel. The sting of betrayal isn't just about what someone does to you. It's about the moment you realize you let it happen, that you let love blind you. The van ride was long, no windows this time, just 4 of us in silence. You learn quickly that silence in these situations is not peace. It is grief, shock, fear, all wrapped into one thick air. I kept my hands in my lap, twisting the corner of my sleeve. I wanted to scream, not because I was angry, but because I needed something, anything, to remind me I was still alive. When we arrived, they processed us again. Fingerprints, photos, more questions. A woman behind a glass window asked me if I had any dependents. I thought about the man I once called my husband. The one I thought I would grow old with. I shook my head and said no, because I was no one's responsibility anymore. I was now just a name on a list, a file in a drawer. They assigned me to a barracks-like room, 10 bunks, a single toilet behind a plastic curtain. No privacy, no mirrors. You start to forget what your own face looks like. You begin to measure your existence by how many times the door opens and how often your name is called for meals. I met another woman there, Rosa. She was from El Salvador. Her story wasn't mine, but the pain in her eyes was familiar. She had tried to escape a violent husband back home. She had crossed rivers, deserts, and barbed wire to reach safety. And now she was here, in a gray room that smelled like metal and soap, waiting to be sent back to the nightmare she ran from. We didn't talk much at first, just sat next to each other during meals. But eventually, one night, she broke the silence. She said, "You look like you loved someone who forgot how to love you back." I didn't answer. I just nodded, because there was nothing else to say. Over the next few days, we shared more. Stories, laughter in the dark, even tears we tried to hide. She braided my hair one morning, said it made me look strong. I wanted to believe her. There was no clock in that room, but we learned to count the hours by the rhythm of the guards. Breakfast came early. Lunch was always lukewarm rice and a protein that tasted like rubber. Dinner was rushed, lights out by 10. And dreams? If they came heavy, filled with memories of lives we no longer had access to. One afternoon, a volunteer came. She brought books in Spanish, magazines, even some crayons and paper for those who wanted to write. I didn't take anything. I just watched. But she approached me gently and asked, "Would you like to talk?" I almost said no. But something about her kindness cracked me open. So I said yes. We sat at a plastic table in the corner of the room. She asked about my story. I told her everything, from the day I crossed the border, to the night I cooked Enrique's favorite meal, to the paper he made me sign. I didn't cry. I had no tears left, but I felt something release as I spoke, like I was no longer carrying the weight alone. She listened without interruption, without judgment. When I finished, she said, "You were tricked, and you're not the only one. But what they stole from you doesn't define you." That sentence stayed with me, not because it erased the pain, but because it reminded me there was still a me underneath the rubble. That night, I took a piece of scrap paper from the common table and wrote my name over and over again, not because I forgot it, but because I needed to remember that I existed beyond what happened to me. I was more than a betrayal. I was more than a signature. Every day after that, I tried to hold on to that thought. I helped the others clean our space. I folded blankets. I listened when someone needed to talk. I remembered what my grandmother used to say. That dignity isn't about what you own. It's about how you carry your pain. And I carried mine with the quiet strength of someone who had already survived worse. If you've ever been in a place where you felt erased, where your voice was stolen and your story was dismissed, I want to hear from you. Share your truth in the comments. Write, "My story matters," because it does. Even if the world tries to silence it, and if this chapter of my journey has stirred something inside you, I invite you to subscribe. Not just for my story, but for yours too. For all of us who are trying to find our way back to ourselves after being broken apart. This is where our voices rise again, together. A few days after my intake at the new detention facility, something changed. I was called out of the sleeping quarters early in the morning. My name echoed through the hallway in a voice I didn't recognize. The guard was firm but not unkind. He told me to bring my ID and follow him. My heart began to race. In places like that, being called unexpectedly always meant something. Sometimes it was good news. Sometimes it was the end of everything. They took me to a small room with 2 chairs and a metal table bolted to the floor. The air was cold and smelled faintly of bleach. I sat and waited, gripping the thin plastic folder with my ID and paperwork, not knowing if this was the moment I'd be taken to the airport or given another number in another line. When the door opened, it wasn't another officer. It was a woman in a navy blue suit, holding a tablet and a file. She introduced herself as a legal advocate from a nonprofit organization. Her Spanish was clear but accented, her eyes sharp and kind at the same time. She told me they had been contacted by the volunteer I spoke to last week, the one who sat with me and said my story mattered. She had read my file. She knew about the signature. She asked me again to explain how it all happened. I spoke slowly, carefully. I told her about Enrique, about the way he looked at me when he handed me that paper, about how he used words like job and help, about how I never would have signed something that would tear my entire life apart. When I finished, she looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You may have been a victim of coercion. We have grounds to appeal this." That sentence didn't feel real at first. I asked her to repeat it. She did, and I cried. For the first time since being taken, I cried. Not because I was broken, but because someone believed me. She explained that my case wasn't unique, that many women had been tricked, coerced, or manipulated into signing documents they didn't understand. Especially those of us with limited English, with no legal representation, with trust in the wrong people. It was a pattern, and now I was not just another number. I was a case, a person again, someone worth fighting for. In the weeks that followed, she came back several times. She brought me copies of paperwork, explained the process. I was given a temporary stay, which meant I wouldn't be deported immediately. It didn't mean I was free, but it meant I had a voice, a chance, a foot in the door. I began attending sessions with a counselor offered through the facility. At first, I was hesitant. What was the point of talking about pain I had already lived? But the counselor, an older woman with gray streaks in her hair and a voice like warm bread, taught me that healing starts with naming things. She said, "What we do not name continues to control us." So I started naming them. Betrayal, fear, loneliness, hope. She helped me write a declaration, a detailed statement of my experience. Every word cut me open. I had to revisit the moments I wanted to forget. The sound of Enrique's voice as he lied. The way the agent told me it was too late. The hollow silence of the detention cell that first night. But writing it down gave me a strange kind of power, like I was pulling the pain out of my chest and setting it on the table for someone else to see. In our group sessions, I met more women like me, a mother from Honduras who had fled domestic violence only to be detained with her 2-year-old, a teenager from Guatemala who had crossed the border after her brother was murdered. Each story a reminder that survival does not mean absence of pain. It means living through it, despite it. We started to care for each other in small ways, saving fruit from our trays for those who were sick, fixing each other's hair, writing letters for those who couldn't read. When one of us cried, someone always reached out, even if no words were spoken. That kind of solidarity is sacred. It is how we held on to our humanity when the world tried to take it from us. One evening, as I was sitting in the courtyard during rec hour, I saw the sunset for the first time in weeks. It was breathtaking. Pink clouds stretched across the sky like they were stitched with gold thread. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not for escape, but for strength, for clarity, for peace. I began to realize that while Enrique had stolen a piece of my life, he had not destroyed all of it. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of loving myself, even if he never could. That revelation did not come in a loud burst. It came in slow waves, through every moment I chose to wake up, to speak, to care, to remember who I was before him. I started to plan, quietly, privately. If I got out, I would work again. I would save money. I would start over, somewhere far from Dallas. I would learn English better, not just enough to survive, enough to never be lied to again, enough to read every word before I signed anything. If you've ever had to rebuild your identity after someone tried to erase it, if you've had to find pieces of yourself in the ashes, write it down in the comments. Say, I am rebuilding, because you are. And your strength is not in what was taken from you, but in how you rise from it. And if this story feels like your own in any way, even in the quietest parts of your heart, subscribe to this channel. Let's keep these stories alive. Let's make sure the truth has a place to be heard, to be held, and to be honored. With the support of the nonprofit advocate, things began to shift in ways I had never dared to imagine. The first step was a temporary stay that halted the deportation process. It did not mean freedom in the way I had once dreamed of it. I was still confined, still watched, still a number in the system. But it meant that for the first time in weeks, I had a sliver of control, a foothold. And control, even in the smallest measure, can feel like oxygen after months underwater. The advocate and I met regularly in a small office with a plastic table and 2 chairs. She brought me documents, explained legal terms in Spanish so that I could understand, guided me step by step through the maze of forms and affidavits. The word appeal became my lifeline. It was a key I had never had before, a tool to fight back against the betrayal that had nearly erased me. I learned how to write a declaration, carefully detailing every moment, the smile that had hidden his plan, the papers he had forced me to sign, the nights of silent suffering in the detention center. Writing it was like pulling shards of glass from my chest. Every memory cut me open, but every word put me closer to survival. She explained that Enrique had committed fraud. He had manipulated the system to his advantage, hiding his marriage to another woman while coercing me into signing away my rights. The legal language was dense, technical, but the meaning was clear. He could be held accountable. That knowledge, that confirmation that I had not failed or imagined this, gave me a power I had never felt. For the first time, I could see the outlines of justice. Life in the detention center continued, but I carried a new sense of purpose. I began teaching myself English in the evenings, practicing phrases quietly in my bunk, reading every word of the small Spanish-English dictionary they provided. I wanted to be prepared, to never again feel helpless because I could not understand what was happening around me. I realized that knowledge was survival, awareness was protection, and preparation was revenge in its quietest, most dignified form. I also began connecting with the other women in ways I hadn't before. There was solidarity in shared struggle. We helped each other write letters, fold clothes, even planned small defenses for our minds against despair. Rosa, the woman who had first listened to me, became my closest ally. We shared our stories in whispers, often late at night when guards were distracted. Her resilience inspired me. She had survived abuse and flight from her country, and yet she carried herself with a dignity that was almost blinding. I clung to her strength as if it could become mine. Weeks turned into months. Each day we worked on legal paperwork, attended counseling sessions, and prepared our cases for review. I discovered an inner endurance I did not know existed. I found courage in the moments when I thought I would break. Courage that came not from hope alone, but from necessity. From the understanding that if I gave up now, if I let despair take over, I would be lost completely. I could not allow that. I would not allow that. The advocate introduced me to an immigration attorney who specialized in fraud and coercion cases. Sitting in her office, listening to her outline the steps, I realized how much of my life had been in other people's hands. But this time, I was holding my own story. I controlled what was submitted. I answered questions. I made choices. Each decision, no matter how small, was a reclaiming of my life. As the legal process unfolded, Enrique was summoned, his actions formally questioned. The thought of him facing the consequences he had long avoided brought a strange sense of satisfaction. Not revenge in the way most people imagine it, but justice as a quiet restoration of balance. I didn't need to see him punished with my own eyes. It was enough to know that the system now knew the truth, that I was not alone, that my story had a witness, that my voice had power. During this time, I also began to plan my life beyond detention. I thought about returning to work, not just cleaning, but helping others who had suffered similar betrayals. I thought about learning more skills, building a network of women who could support each other. Every small plan was a thread connecting me back to the world I had almost lost. Every day, the walls of the detention center felt a little less suffocating because I carried hope within me, a hope built not on someone else's promises, but on my own choices and preparation. I started noticing small things I had ignored for years. The way the sunlight caught the courtyard in the mornings, the faint scent of jasmine outside the facility, the sound of birds even behind fences. I reminded myself that the world still existed outside these walls and that I could return to it, whole again. I was learning to live again in the smallest details, reclaiming my senses as if each one had been stolen during the months of betrayal and captivity. One night, I sat alone on my bunk and wrote a letter to my younger self. I told her to trust cautiously, to recognize love and loyalty for what they are, and to never sign anything without understanding it fully. I told her that even when people betray, even when life seems to erase you, you can rebuild. That survival is not just breathing. It is reclaiming your identity, your voice, your dignity. Each word strengthened me, each sentence a shield against despair. If you have ever felt powerless because someone manipulated your life, because you trusted the wrong person, or because the system seemed designed to crush you, leave a comment and write, "I am reclaiming myself." Your voice matters. Your experience matters. You are not alone. And even when the world tries to erase your story, it can be written again, stronger and clearer. And if this story speaks to something deep inside you, subscribe to this channel. Subscribe not for numbers or likes, but to witness the journey of reclaiming life, rebuilding trust in yourself, and discovering that even in the darkest moments, you can find strength. Here, we honor survival. Here, we honor you. I finally stepped out of the detention center with a mix of fear and wonder coursing through me. The air felt different outside, heavier with possibility, lighter with hope. I was still the same María del Carmen López, the woman who had crossed deserts, folded laundry in silence, and signed papers she never should have. But I was also someone new, someone forged in fire, tempered in betrayal, strengthened by survival. Every step on the sidewalk, every car that passed, every stranger that walked by reminded me that life continued. And this time, I would move through it on my own terms. I found a small apartment through a local community organization. It wasn't much. A tiny kitchen, one bedroom, a living space that barely fit a sofa. But it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt the exhilaration of creating a home without fear, without compromise. I unpacked slowly, each object placed deliberately. My grandmother's rosary, a few photographs from my childhood, a small candle I had carried in my backpack for months. They became anchors, reminders that I had endured, that I had survived, and that I could thrive. I began to reconnect with the world around me. I took long walks in the mornings, savoring the sound of the wind through the trees, the laughter of children playing in yards, the smell of freshly baked bread from a local bakery. Every ordinary moment felt miraculous, infused with a richness I had never appreciated before. I started volunteering with immigrant women who had been through detention or abusive relationships. I shared my story, not to dwell in pain, but to illuminate a path for others, to show that survival was possible, and that hope, even in the smallest measure, could rebuild lives. Each woman I met carried her own scars, her own version of betrayal, fear, and isolation. And yet, together, we built a fragile community of trust. We shared resources, we whispered warnings, we celebrated victories. It was a reminder that we are not islands. Even in the darkest periods, connection has the power to heal. I began to see my experiences not just as suffering endured, but as tools to guide others. My pain became purpose. My silence, once exploited, became a voice. I returned to work, slowly, cautiously. I wanted independence, financial security, and the freedom to make choices without interference. Every paycheck felt like a declaration, proof that I could sustain myself, that I could live beyond the shadow of betrayal. I saved diligently, each dollar a step toward reclaiming autonomy, toward building a future I controlled completely. At night, I still think of the woman I was, the naive girl who signed the papers without reading them, who trusted someone who did not deserve her faith. I mourn her sometimes. I whisper apologies to her, and I remind her she was brave, even when she did not know it. And then, I look at the woman have become, stronger, wiser, vigilant, capable of love that is cautious but unbroken. I have learned that the deepest wounds can teach the most profound truths about our resilience. My story is no longer just about betrayal and loss. It is about reclamation, about rebuilding life from the fragments of pain, about seeing oneself reflected in courage and survival. I carry gratitude for the advocates, the volunteers, the women who shared their stories, and for the community that allowed me to feel safe again. Gratitude for the quiet strength that rose from despair, for the small victories, and for the knowledge that life, even after profound betrayal, can be rebuilt piece by piece. And now, as you watch this, I hope you take with you a sense of perseverance. If you have ever felt lost, deceived, or abandoned, know that survival is possible. Know that your voice matters. Know that the smallest acts of courage, like sharing your truth or seeking help, can reshape your life entirely. Thank you for following my journey. Thank you for witnessing this story, for allowing it to exist beyond the walls where it began. Your attention, your empathy, your willingness to listen is a gift. If this story has touched you, if it has made you feel seen, valued, or understood, click on the next video on your screen. Let it guide you to more stories of survival, courage, and hope. Let it remind you that no matter how dark the path, there is always a way forward, and there are always stories that prove we can rise again. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. Thank you for holding space for someone who once felt erased. And thank you for allowing these stories to remind us all that even in the face of betrayal, fear, and loss, we can survive, we can rebuild, and we can thrive.